Construction keying allows the building to be built with security that's in play and the trades going in and out of the building have temporary keys that will not work after the building is turned over, is what it is. It's a very elegant way to handle that. The other way it's handled is you build the building and then you call the locksmith and he rekeys everything. That's paying for something twice, it seems. So you don't really want to do that if you certainly don't have to. It's common for someone to buy something and call the locksmith to have it rekeyed, like a house. Not a big deal. You've got 10 locks. You don't have, you know, 2,000 locks to rekey in a new structure. So construction keying comes into play. We deal with it all the time. I'm always selling green construction cores from Best because people, are working on putting something in. They need to install the doors, the frames, the hinges, the locks, the closers, and they need to be able to turn over to the owner a secured door. So they'll buy the construction core, they'll have the operating key, the control key, they'll turn that over, and then the owner comes and puts their cores in that scenario. Or what's happened is the factory on the lock order it's been arranged where they'll ship the cores directly to the owner or the owner's representative and not to the contractor. So there's no contamination of those biddings. No one other than the people who are supposed to have possession of them would have them. And, different ways to achieve this. Lost ball, blockout blade, and core swap. I called it core swap just when you're doing construction cores. You'll also probably be familiar with the black plastic thumb turn cores that will be stuck in a Sargent lock or a Best lock. Obviously, I just sold some of those plastic construction cores today. The reason for that was, and it does tie into construction keying. This client has bought over the last few months 3 dozen Schlage L series locks, 50 function, 40 function, and 10 function. All the 50s are a B suffix, so it's small format housings. And it's kind of hard to know that the lock absolutely works when you install it if you don't have the core. And that lock, that L9050B, is not going to include a construction core or a plastic core. But when you have a construction core or a black plastic core, you can actually test the operation. Is the cylinder threaded incorrectly? Does the latch retract? Does the bolt throw? Does the trim operate correctly? So another reason for construction keying is so that the person installing the locks can assure that everything works. That's where that is. So let's switch to the screen view and let's dive into this chapter. Construction keying. Construction keying is a means by which to install the permanent cylinders on a project, but to supply them with construction keys as the temporary operating blanks. And upon completion of the project, the construction operating keys are rendered obsolete by means of using a certain key, sometimes called a breakout key, or tool, sometimes referred to as a blockout blade extractor, or removing the core, or using, again, that construction key, or the master that will trip the construction key to not work. There are 3 methods I will mention here, and those are lost ball, a method of using very small ball bearings that act as a master wafer. The construction key will have a cut slightly deeper so as to accommodate the diameter of the balls. In Schlage, there would be 3 that would be used. With the balls in the chamber, the construction key operates normally. When the breakout key is inserted, these balls are lifted to the Bible component on the cylinder. That's the area of the cylinder shell where the driver and the spring is, above the shear line. So you insert the breakout key, or the key that renders the construction key obsolete. Those balls are now up in above the shear line. Once the key is turned, those balls become trapped in a small hole that happens to be drilled in the plug right on the side of that chamber, disabling the construction key from operating. Once the key is turned, those balls will become trapped in the small hole drilled. It's disabled. Many lock manufacturers have this type of system, and some do it differently, but the result is the same. Interestingly, the system can be employed so that the end user can recombinate your cylinder without having to call a locksmith. That is, I have learned a method by which you can do that in a couple of chambers. So you buy a lock, you'll get 3 different keys with it, and they're loaded with these construction balls. So you can use the first key until it's time for you to change that cylinder, and you install the second key and it will render the first one no good. And then you can install a third key to render the first and second no good. And that's a different way that the lost ball method is used. Pretty convenient if you're a homeowner and you've got these other 2 sets of keys somewhere safe. You don't have to call a locksmith if you don't want to. While careful planning and small drilling in the cylinder plug, with careful planning and small drilling in the cylinder plug, you ought to be able to accommodate 1 rekey event for every cylinder chamber after chamber 1. So if you're going to modify this yourself, you could. If you played with enough cylinder plugs, you should be able to get the hole drilled in the right location. Not that you would ever do this. That we're just talking about construction keying. Number 2 is the blockout blade. Schlage has it. So lost ball, many people have it. Blockout blade, Schlage certainly has it. Best certainly has it. This is a modified key tip that is inserted into the cylinder plug, preventing a full-size key from entering the cylinder broaching. That means there's something stuck down in there. You can't put a full-size key into it, and your construction key is only half the length. Okay. Therefore, the construction keys are correspondingly shorter. Use of the blockout blade extractor, this is a tool, it's got a hook on it, allows you to free that inserted blockout blade from the broaching in the cylinder. It's being held in the way it's cut. It's being trapped inside of there. And it's helpful to have the correct tool to pull it out. If you know what you're doing, you don't need the correct tool. But it's nice to have the correct tool. The engineer in the Big Ten University probably may not be thinking about how that works, or maybe they know all about it. But having the right tool to pull those out. I sell those occasionally to universities, and it's best every time that I really sell it. And you'll use that blockout blade tool to pull that out. What happens, you pull that little sliver out that's in the core. Obviously, all the construction keys don't work because they're too short. Core swap. You can order temporary construction cores that are inherently the same physical hardware as the permanent cores, except they are meant to be returned to the factory once the permanent cores are installed. These are all the same bitting. So if you have a green core from Best, every other green core is the same bitting. Every green construction key will work every other core, and Best and other manufacturers have different colors because they're different bittings. Now, what we'll get into next, though, has to be taken into account when you consider construction keying. I mentioned construction keying as it will not have, I mentioned construction keying as it will have a not insignificant impact, meaning it's going to severely impact on your ability to fully yield bittings from your KBA. In the lost ball method, you will certainly lose the progression possibility of the lost ball chamber for the cut from the construction. It's going to be a 25% loss because you're doing construction keying. Correspondingly, those cuts used in the blockout blade method are also lost. In the core swap program of construction keying, you only lose that one bitting of that construction key, which the construction cores were combinated to. So the blockout blade, you're going to lose the most because you're going to pull out probably from three chambers, you'll pull out one progression possibility. For lost ball, you'll lose one progression possibility from one chamber. These numbers really add up. So think of your KBA as becoming a modified, or limited position progression because you're not going to progress every chamber. As a result, you'll progress every chamber. You won't progress every progressive possibility in each chamber where you have the construction keying accommodated. Accommodated is what you'll lose. So you have to be mindful of that. And unless you're going to sit down and have to create a couple of thousand biddings, the factory is going to let you know with you providing them the expansion specification whether or not the system will be able to do it in one keyway. A final word on construction keying is that it must be planned at system inception so that these losses of the KBA can be understood from day one. That's why, it's what we just said. You can certainly perform construction keying, but understanding its impact is required. Therefore, your lock factory will certainly perform this task for you and likely give you the peace of mind that it is done correctly. All right, the next chapter is record keeping. We've kind of already talked about that a little bit earlier with transmitting, but this is just a different perspective on this same concept. Let's wrap up this video on camera and then we'll move to record keeping. As far as I'm concerned, construction keying needs to be incorporated into a lot of what we do automatically. When you sell a lock, if construction is going to be a long period of time, you're going to need secured rooms. You're going to need to control access to who is going in and out. I've done projects where there's different colored cores for construction keying. There's one color for the outside of the building. There's a different color for the inside of the building. If you've got green and that's inside, you're not getting in the building because those are red. Until the site supervisor gets there, unlocks the door, then you can go anywhere inside that has a green core. But you've got very expensive material, obviously, on the job site. You've got to be able to lock stuff up, but you have to be able to do so in the sense that the owner's best interests are also safeguarded, so that there's not keys laying around. Plus, also, I find providing construction cores can be beneficial because the owner shows up and says, there are no cores in these locks if you've not provided them. You didn't sell me the cores. You owe me the cores. No, they were never included. Your responsibility is to provide the cores. So having it built in to where the owner is given the keys, here you go, at least they've got security over that in the interim time between construction, obtaining, receiving, and installing the permanent cores, and then being on the other side of that. Anyway, let's move on to record keeping.